Hey guys, this is Wojtek, and today we're going to continue our fundamental series looking at timers as well as the FTimerHandle. We're going to go over what timers allow us to do within our game, as well as actually hook them up to our destructible props so we can trigger some interesting behaviors. For example, we're going to have a delayed destruction, we're going to be able to pause and unpause our triggers, and then just generally wait around until these things explode. So let's get started. Alright, so let's get into creating our our delayed and triggerable destructible components. And to do so, we're going to pop over to Visual Studio and open up our destructible prop, which we did in our previous video. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new timer handle. And what this guy's going to represent is basically anytime we want to trigger a timer of sorts, we're going to make reference to this handle that we're going to pass into our time manager, and that in turn is going to have hooks into our various methods that are going to then trigger these various events at the end of our timer delay. So let's go ahead and throw in this new property. So FTimerHandle, and we're going to call this guy our trigger destroy timer handle. And with the FTimerHandle, you don't really need any additional header files. It just kind of comes in as part of the various object definitions. Now, the other thing we need to do is, because our timer handle is actually going to call a method at the end of its life cycle, we need to define this method. So we're going to create a new method, and it's going to be a U function as well, because we want to have all this stuff accessible to our engine for various garbage collection type behaviors. And we're going to call this guy trigger destroy. So now let's go ahead and implement a little bit of logic around these guys. And we're going to do that by opening up our CPP file. And we're going to define the actual time manager details that our handle is going to reference. So to do that, we're going to go down to our trigger method, because we want to do this when we overlap with our destructible prop component. And if you guys recall, we already have this destroy method down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add now our new trigger destroy method, and it really doesn't have much going on in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this definition, this actual destroy call, and we're going to drop it down here. We'll have the same conditionals, because we want to make sure that, hey, it's not destroyed, and is our trigger enabled, just in case we call this function independent of anything else. Now, the other thing you'll notice is our other actor is not available, because we're getting it from the trigger method. This guy's just a void, so he doesn't have that access, and that's okay. We'll use something else for this. You know what, let's get the up vector from our destructible component. And obviously this isn't the right sort of hit definition when you create your game or your characters or your props or whatever it is you're doing with these timers. Obviously make sure to clean up sort of these definitions so your explosions are happening in the right point in time from the right location within the world. Okay, so we have our method that's going to be called at the end of our timer, and it does just a little bit of checks and triggers our delay. And now actually let's go ahead and trigger the timer. So to do that, you need to get at the time manager. And the time manager is available to you through the world. So if we get our world and then we get our time manager, we can now do a bunch of different operations on our timers. So let's just do a very simple one where we go ahead and trigger the trigger destroy method. So our timer manager has a bunch of methods on it, but the one we're going to look at is set timer. And what we're going to do in the set timer is, if we look at our method signature, there's a couple of different ones, but it has the FTimerHandle, the out handle, the callback to our timer. And you also notice, let me see if I can get this for you guys. There we go. there's a couple of different method signatures. This one takes in a function callback. This one doesn't. This one takes in some delegates and, you know, sort of various other definitions depending on your use case. In our example, it's going to be fairly straightforward. So we're going to bring in our trigger destroy timer handle as the first parameter. And then we're going to say that we want this object to be passed in as part of our timer. And further to that, we're going to say at the end of this timer execution, we're going to bring in a destructible prop trigger destroy. And then we have a couple of other parameters we can pass in. So do we really care about them? A little bit. So 1F means every second. So we're going to run this, this trigger basically every second if required, or for 1 second. And the last we're just going to say let me just get this boolean here. Is loop, we're going to make that false. So we're not going to loop over any of this, and within 1 second we're going to trigger this method. So you know what, actually let's make this 5 seconds. It'll make it a little easier to wait. So let's recompile and see what this looks like. Okay, so with our project recompiled, let's now take a look at what this looks like on our prop. One change I did do while this was recompiling is I changed the word trigger, destroy timer handle, from Tigger to trigger. So a little bit of a typo, in case you caught that while I was typing earlier. Okay, so let's go back to our Unreal editor. And we're just going to take this rock guy. Just make sure everything's still okay. Okay, there's a destructible rock. Let's make sure his class settings are still... Okay, so our trigger is enabled. Because remember last time we made this optional. Our max health is 1, our default damage impulse is 1, so basically it should destroy itself when our trigger occurs. So let's go ahead and drag this rock now into our scene. And let's see if it works. So there's a guy, our punches and kicks, all that stuff works. We'll wait for the cursor to go away. And there we go. We just triggered our event, and in 5 seconds this thing should collapse. There it goes. Pretty cool. And just to make sure everything is working, let's get now a few more of these guys. And I'm just copying and pasting them. And there we go. There's a bunch of rocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run around, make sure all these triggers are being triggered, and then just stand back and watch the destruction. Look at that. Triggers. Magic. Okay, but this is all fine and well, but we have a bunch of bugs with stuff. So if we walk into our trigger area, you'll notice it gets triggered over and over, which means the timer is being set off a bunch of times. And eventually it just still work. There we go, collapses. But we don't want to introduce that additional load on our game. So let's determine how we can check whether or not our timers are already running. And sure enough, the time manager has methods for this already. So what we're going to do is right when our trigger message is being called, we're going to say, hey, get world, get time manager, and then we can say, is timer active? And you notice there's paused and pending, and there's a bunch of different sort of methods and operations you can perform on timers. But in this case, we're just going to say, hey, are you active? And you'll notice this guy only takes in the FTimerHandle as the input. That's why you can have, or it's recommended you have a bunch of them, so you can control your timers independently of each other. And we're going to basically say, hey, if this guy is active, don't do anything. But if he's not, we can start it back up. Now, the other thing we can also do is we can say, hey, if he's already active, we can actually pause him or reset him, or kind of do whatever we want. So in this case, we're going to say, actually, we're going to take this debug message, and we're going to say pausing timer. And over here, we're going to say starting timer. So now we can say get world, get time manager, and we can say, what can we say? We can say clear timer. And you'll notice the method basically resets our timer. So there we go. And now if we walk into our trigger area, nothing should happen. So let's recompile and just take a quick look. Okay, so we're all recompiled. Let's see what our trigger logic looks like now. So there's our guy, and I'm going to walk in here and do a trigger. And there we go. I just paused it. So now, this rock, I mean, nothing's going to happen to it right up until I walk in again, walk away, and it should blow up. There it goes. So now we have a cool little pausing mechanic. And that way we can actually delay our events if, you know, there's sort of user intervention from the player. We don't necessarily need to kind of handle this just on its own. We can actually now have user input to stop certain actions. Cool. So what else can we do? Well, timers are pretty interesting in the sense that you can also have them count down to things. So we can have a timer running every so often, and when it runs, it's actually going to do a little bit of work. So it's not just a straight through, hey, count down to 5, and then trigger a specific method. We can get a little bit, just a little bit more intelligent with that. So to do that, we're going to create a new method. And actually, let's be good scientists and start at the header. So we're going to create a new function. And we're going to call this guy, we're going to call this trigger. So actually, new function. So this trigger is, or this method rather, is going to be called trigger countdown to destroy. And what this guy's going to do is he's going to check itself every so often, every second in our case, and basically count down from a preset number. So let's say 10, for lack of imagination. And to keep that counter, I'm just going to create a new variable called trigger countdown. And what trigger countdown is going to do is he's going to be used by this guy to basically subtract from a specific number to trigger our event. So let's go ahead and now define our trigger countdown. Actually, you know what? Let's make this guy configurable. So we can set per prop different countdowns. Okay, and our default is going to be not the method. We're just going to make it 10. So 10 seconds and something happens. Okay, so now, rather than calling the timer manager on trigger destroy, what we're going to do is we're going to say trigger countdown to destroy, and we're going to run this every second. So every second we're going to execute this guy. So what is this guy going to do? So let's go ahead and create him here. And essentially what he's going to do is just subtract from that variable. So we're going to do a little bit of cleverness. We're going to say trigger countdown less than or equal to 0. Do something. Otherwise, do something else. And all I'm doing here is basically the equivalent of right? So minus minus or plus plus just means increase value by by 1. But I decided to be a little bit clever and just do it as part of my if conditional. So I'm going to subtract and check all in one shot. And then what do we want to do? Well, if we are less than, then we actually want to trigger the our trigger destroy method. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a call to another timer. We're going to do some timerception here. So we're going to say set timer, and we're going to use the same handle for it, this, and a destructible prop, trigger destroy, and we can even say, just to add a little bit more randomness, we can introduce a 32 random delay, and we'll use the fmath library to essentially generate a random integer between some value, and that way we have a static countdown, and then we'll add a little bit of variance to when the actual destruction occurs. So you can kind of get now into the mindset of those situations where, you know, in a movie, someone throws a dynamite stick, you know, the fuse goes down into the dynamite, gets, finishes burning. Dynamite doesn't explode, someone goes and, you know, tries to poke at it, boom, explosion. So this is kind of what we're doing. We're adding just a little bit of variance to our behavior. And we're going to use rand range for that. And we're basically going to say, yeah, let's start this between 1 and, let's say 4 seconds. And we're going to say random delay. So cool. So if we finally get our countdown occurring, we're gonna trigger a delayed blow up on our prop. If nothing is happening, then, you know, we'll just get some messages showing up here. So let's take this one and make sure we capture all of this stuff. So if we're in here, then we are simply saying, okay, counting down. And say fstring from int trigger countdown. So that's going to get us one message. We're going to add another one here that basically says, oh no, sorry, this is going to be, I have these guys backwards. So there's our countdown message, and this one is going to be just a little bit different. It's going to be triggering explosion after, you know, some seconds passed. And we're going to pass in our random delay. There we go. There's our message. And what else? So we're going to have our countdown occurring. We're going to be able to trigger our destroy. All of this stuff is still intact. So let's, you know, we're just going to add one more message here. We're going to say, about to explode. Let's just get rid of that junk. Okay, so let's recompile and see what all this looks like. Okay, all of our stuff is recompiled. Let's take a look. So I'm just going to run into this guy here, and you can see there is our countdown message. 4, 3, 2, 1. It should now trigger an explosion after 4 randomly generated seconds. And there we go. Now, we can also do this with all of these guys. And let's get a slightly nicer vantage point. There you go, guys. Look at that. Random event generation. And we don't need to do that, right? We don't need to create the second timer that I created. We could have simply just said at the end of the countdown, you know, if we comment this out, oops. If we comment this out, and we simply call destroy. And we can even say just trigger destroy. I don't even need to call destroy. And we'll recompile this guy and just take a look. Alright, so we're all recompiled, and I've modified our code now not to use the second trigger, but rather directly blow up when our countdown starts. So let's trigger this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. And we'll stand back and just take a look. There you go. Again, pretty powerful. So let's make one small alteration and see how that plays out. So not only are we going to do random delays on the trigger, but we can also do random delays on the actual countdown. So right now we are just setting it to 10 seconds, and it kind of goes from there. Or we can introduce a random value into our trigger countdown that then kind of takes over and does its own thing. So the way to do that is we can simply say, hey, if I am ready to kick off the countdown, let's set our trigger countdown to be fmath rand range, and we're going to set it between 1 and 10. So if we recompile now, again, we're going to get a bunch of variants on each one of our rocks. Okay, guys, so with our project recompiled, let's now take a look at what our timers are going to behave like. So there we go. We started our timer. We got a random countdown of 7, and then we should get a random delay of 2. And there goes our rock. Cool. So our timers work, our delays work, our countdowns work, everything seems to be working okay. Now let's go ahead and actually add in a few more props to make sure they're working as expected as well, because they're all referencing our destructible prop as a base class. All of these changes should just be, automatically inherited. So let's take a look at our sphere. And there's our ball. I just want to make sure damage and all that stuff is set correctly. Now the max health I'm just going to set to 1, just because I don't need to demonstrate the actual impacts that our player does on this, but rather just the timers do their thing. So that guy looks okay, and let's take a look at our pillar, make sure that guy's okay too. There's that destructible component, and cool. So we're all at 1, 1, 1 for these values, and now let's add in our pillar. I'm just going to pop it a little bit above the mesh, and let's pop in our sphere. Actually, we'll do 2 spheres just to demonstrate. So sphere 1, I walk in, I hit, it blows up. But our timers are still being triggered just because we don't have the logic for on take damage, ignore any timers. But this guy, I can roll him around. And you'll notice I'm still pausing and resuming the timer. And there we go. That blew up. Our rock should still blow up as expected. There goes our rock. And lastly, let's take a look at this pillar, which should explode nicely after a countdown. Bam, look at that. So with very minimal effort, we were able to introduce a pile of different behaviors to our existing logic just by refactoring things a little bit and introducing the concept of delays. And you guys can go ahead and use this paradigm for stamina management. So as I'm running around, I have a timer that basically counts down my stamina. When I stop, the timer kicks in and starts rebuilding it. There's different ways and different sort of utilizations for these timers. Hey, I'm on fire, I need to cause damage over a period of time, poison. I've done so much work I need to take a break till, let's say, 24 hours rolls over, kind of Stardew Valley type stuff where their energy drops. So basically, whatever you can think of from timing, delay, countdown, or increase of value standpoint, timer handles are really, really good for that. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you guys next time.